Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the RPG Closet. This is Dwayne here from the Game Nexus, and today we're diving into my closet again and digging out an old gem, which just refuses to give itself up. This game that we're going to be talking about today is the Star Wars RPG. Now, this game in particular has just never ceased to be current in the marketplace for role-playing games. Currently you can walk into a store and buy a brand new copy of the Star Wars RPG. However, it's not the RPG that first came out back in 1987. So let's dive in, and I'll tell you a little bit about the history of the game, and then we'll walk through the various incarnations, tell you which one I like the best. The good thing about it is that you can go and buy a new copy, and there's a little bit of a tease coming because I'll let you know later on about how you can get a copy of the oldest version of the game as well, brand new, mind you. Okay, so let's talk Star Wars RPG. This game originally made its appearance in 1987 in the market, and that time frame you would have saw not a lot of licensed games. You would have seen Marvel Superheroes, and there was some stuff from TSR, believe it or not, an Indiana Jones RPG was floating around that time as well. But mainly Dungeons and Dragons dominated the scene, as well as TSR having their own sci-fi universe called Star Frontiers, and of course lots of other stuff. But the big name games were obviously Dungeons and Dragons. At that point, you started seeing games like Robotech and other such, space sci-fi genres spinning out. But, lo and behold, a little surprise came, and it landed on my desk or my table when I was a younger teenager, and it was the Star Wars RPG. I happen to have the last revision of that game here. As they move throughout the years and eventually just refine the game. My original books, unfortunately, are lost in time at the moment, so I do have different expanded editions, but I really wish I had my originals. So what made this game really exciting? Well, first off, it's Star Wars, so any kid in the 80s, had seen Star Wars. The role-playing game wasn't heavily marketed. I actually got my copies from my stepdad, who went to Disneyland and came back from Star Tours and said, "Here, you might like these." And my mind was blown, because now, knowing D&D, I now had a role-playing game with all the stats and information about Star Wars that I could have. And it came in 2 books to start with. The books were laid out really well. They actually incorporated a lot of in-universe advertising. There's stills from the movie, color pages, just really high production quality for a role-playing book at that time, as well as hardbound. So obviously the company West End Games, who published it, put a lot of effort into it, and that license was held dear. So that game really got me going on Star Wars, the RPG. Played many sessions of it, and one of the neat things about that role-playing game, and West End Games in general, is when they started rolling with the products that came out of the core books, those products actually pretty much created the expanded universe for Star Wars. During those years, there wasn't a plethora of comic books and material. I mean, you had the Marvel comic books, who published a Star Wars comic, which I don't believe was in canon. I mean, even the term canon at that point, was very vague. A lot of these companies hadn't locked down exactly what they viewed as legitimate canon or not. So, Marvel went crazy with different stories told in the Star Wars universe. West End Games did a very similar thing, where they drew inspiration from the comics, and they even created new concepts themselves, like new stories, new characters, even new spaceship designs. And the neat thing, as you moved into the 90s, a lot of West End Games' material started being taken as quote-unquote canon for Star Wars, which was quite cool, actually, until most recently got it wiped clean by Disney. So the RPG, let's just talk a little bit about what the actual system it used. So the Star Wars RPG, the genius of the system was that it used what's called a D6 system. So me, as a Dungeons & Dragons player, expecting to pick up the Star Wars game and have tons of complex details. I mean, it is spaceships and blasters and Jedi powers. The entire game used a single die. It used a D6 die, a standard dice that's common across any kind of tabletop game you'd ever play. So this game basically created its complex mechanics, all revolving around difficulty numbers. And I think that was the first time I'd ever actually even experienced the concept of a difficulty number, and D6s. So characters who wanted to perform an action simply had a difficulty number that was assigned to it by the dungeon or the game master, whether that be 10, 15, 25, and they basically created a pool of 6-sided dice based on their abilities. So if you were good at shooting blasters, you would have 5d6. You'd have multiple d6s in your pool. If you weren't so good, you'd have a couple of them. And then also adding in modifiers. You rolled your pool of dice, and if you beat your difficulty number, you succeeded. And that's pretty much the entire game system in how it worked. There was obviously little tweaks here and there, but the concept of a difficulty number and a dice pool made up of d6s is pretty much all there was to it. Now, that simplicity has pretty much carried this game through. Currently, there's a massive, vibrant community who are currently playing this game because they managed to hold on to the original core books. Those books are even available online right now. There's communities who have gone and compiled all the editions. They've even created cover art to modernize it, interior art to modernize it. You can literally go to various Google Plus communities online and pick up and print off your own copy of these rules, and it will look new. And it's mainly because the core mechanic holds up so well. So talk a little bit about what you could get when you actually got your core set. One of the neat things is that West End Games wasn't lazy when it came to supplements. You know, they created their own. There was Galaxy Guides. This is a pretty good one, is Galaxy Guide, Fragments of the Outer Rim. Another cool thing is the Timothy Zahn novels of the early 90s. West End Games scooped those up as well and made the source books for each of those novels, which again expanded the universe. And it was around that time where the words canon sort of started coming into conversation quite a lot, you know, because I guess Lucasfilm realized that there was a lot of material out in the wild, and they wanted to sort of get control over what they viewed as canon and what some of the material was not. Like I said, again, you saw the original books, or you saw my final revision. That would be, say, the final edition that hit store shelves, that compiled everything before it. Great book, and I'm glad I've kept on to that as well. So a little bit about where we're at now with Star Wars. Well, you know, moving past West End Games and their demise in the early 90s, we've seen that license float not too many times. I think it's only floated maybe twice since then, actually. So the current license holder is Fantasy Flight Games, and you'll know those guys from X-Wing, Imperial Assault, and various other board games that they make. But they acquired the Star Wars license. I'm not too sure, I think around 2012, I could be wrong on the date. And they've set forth creating various tabletop games centered around that license. So Star Wars, the role-playing game, was picked up by them, and they actually went and broke that down into various very heavy-duty core books. The first one that hit the market was The Edge of the Empire, dealing with the Outer Rim and sort of the seediest parts of the Star Wars galaxies. They have two other companion books. There's Star Wars Rebellion, which deals with the sort of the wartime side of the era, and then of course The Force and Destiny, which is the Jedi and what have you. In between those, the most current and the most, you know, the oldest, there was Wizards of the Coast. And Wizards of the Coast actually had this license for many years as well, and developed a lot of product. This particular is the core rulebook that I bought on day one. They also had a starter box. And the neat thing about this particular product was that it actually incorporated their Roll20, and this is referred to as Roll20. So this book actually incorporated their Dungeons and Dragons game system into the actual Star Wars universe. So sort of the early days of cross-compatible rules. Again, they made a lot of product for this, and I think the overall reception to the game was quite good. It lasted a good 10 years, I believe, as far as them holding on to the license. So, I mean, it could be viewed as a definitive version of the game as well. When they lost the license, not a lot of people are playing the Roll20 version. There seems to be a split in the community between either playing the most current version, which is the Fantasy Flight Games, or going back to the original. I don't hear a lot of chatter over D20. I'm not too sure why that is. So, like I teased at the beginning, which one do you play, and you know, which is the version for you? Well, it really does depend. You know, the nostalgic gamer in me leans heavily towards the original D6 RPG. The mechanics are super clean, very easy to pick up and play. But by the same token, some of the material is a little bit dated. They're not as current as maybe some of the more Star Wars diehards would like it to be. I mean, there's definitely lots of material out there that you can pick up online that will bring it up to date. Heck, I even saw a Star Wars Rebels, based on the new cartoon that's out right now, supplement created by a community member for the D6 RPG, complete with artwork. So if you are okay with digging around a little bit and looking for some source material to add to your game, you know, definitely going to recommend the D6 version. And if you want to do a little bit of your own work creating supplements and such, you won't be disappointed. I guess the big question is, how do you get a copy of it? Well, like I said earlier, you can go online and download entire copies of these rulebooks. You don't need to buy them. You won't be able to buy them in store. Now, the tease comes is that apparently Fantasy Flight Games has announced that they are going to be publishing the original West End Games core rulebooks, the two books, the source book and the starter rulebook or the player's book, in their original covers and original state sometime this year, I believe, or maybe early next year. But they somehow managed to acquire the rights to do that. I'm not too sure the politics behind it, the business side, but they are actually publishing those original books, and rest assured I will be buying copies. Now, they aren't going to be the original, the value might not be there, but the nostalgic is going to be there. It's an interesting move because, I mean, if you consider the fact that they currently have a competing game system in place to that, it's kind of interesting because they may, in fact, actually be encouraging people to go back and revisit the original book and maybe dig online for some of the supplements. It probably won't happen, but it has a small, tiny chance of possibly cinching the revenue stream from their current line of products. People might go, you know what, I'm going to stick with this older stuff and not buy any of the new stuff. So let it bring us current with the new Fantasy Flight role-playing system. I refer to it as the Edge of the Empire, but again, there's two different source books. This system is very cool. I really did enjoy it. The game, mostly Fantasy Flight, uses a unique set of dice, which is cool, and you know, symbols and what have you, but the mechanics flow very nicely. Now, granted, it is a new rule system. There's lots of material, and there's going to be a pretty steep learning curve. And my initial readings of the newer role-playing game, there's a lot of material. I mean, the core rulebooks are just thick, and they've broken the entire game up over the course of many different products. So by contrast, you know, in the older system, you can buy the book and just start going nuts with your creativity. If you are the kind of gamer that likes to have material presented to you without you having to do a lot of creation, the Fantasy Flight system is probably going to be really good for it, but it's also going to be hard on your pocketbook. They have literally supplements for everything, and of course, all viewed as canon in as far as how Lucasfilm manages their properties now. So if you do like that, the artwork is stunning. If you're the kind of person like me where artwork just triggers your imagination and you know, gets things thinking up there, then that's Fantasy Flight's got you covered on that part for sure. So I mean, it's just a matter of how much money you want to spend to get into the Star Wars RPG, and also, you know, what your rule preferences are. If you like dynamic dice with lots of different options within the game by interpreting those dice, go with the new system. If you like the simplicity and let your imagination do the rest, go online and dig out copies of the older books. So that's my overview of the Star Wars role-playing game, a little bit of the history. I hope you guys managed to follow it. There is a little bit convoluted as the years went by, but suffice to say, no matter what version you pick up, I have a feeling that you'll be more than happy with it. And if you're always curious and you want some more information, make sure you throw some comments down at the end of the video. We do reply to them as well. And of course, if you like these videos, you got to subscribe. We try and do as many RPG closets as we can. And eventually one day, I'm probably going to run out of RPGs in my closet. But for now, I got lots to go through. So keep checking back weekly. And thanks for tuning in, guys.